have you gotten to the point in your life where you're saying, God, how could America get any worse than what it already is? Have you ever caught yourself saying that just when you think everything has reached the low as it can go as far as the nation is concerned, something happens and you go, wow, it's getting even worse. And we see this downward spiral. And what I want to talk about today is how do you know when a country, and you may not realize it, but there's a passage we're going to look at this morning that God shows the progression of what an individual or a nation can go through before his judgment comes. Because we're asking, how long can God keep favoring America in the moral condition that we're in? And again, what I want us to see is the condition of the world, of our country, and that will determine how we're going to try to reach out to them in the name of Christ. And so if you have your Bibles, go into the book of Romans chapter 1. This is a passage, like I say, that God lets us know when we as a nation, when we abandon God, he says he leaves us up to our own devices, and we see this downward spiral. And what I want us to see today is we're getting close to getting at the bottom. And how much longer God can hold off, I don't know, if we don't repent and if there's not a revival that comes to our nation. Because God will have to do something before too long. And we're going to see this morning that many people think it's one thing, but at the very end of this passage, you're going to see how these last few verses would be like if you were reading the newspaper in America today. It would describe our country. So I want to begin reading in Romans chapter 1, and I want to start with verse number 24. And the first several verses, just introductory. This is part of a larger passage, and I'm not trying to debate is this mean that the end times is here? It could be. I don't want to say that, but I will say, regardless of whether Christ is coming soon, when a country does certain things, God is obliged to, although he's a God of long suffering, he will bring judgment. Now, whether that's the second coming or not, I don't know. But regardless of whether if it is or is not, we need to realize that this is the condition of our country. And if we as a church at Cornerstone are going to make an impact in our city, we've got to understand the mindset of people. And believe me, the older you get, the less likely you're going to realize that this is so true. There may be some pushback this morning. Say it's not like that. But I want us to see what from this passage and then look at our culture, see what we're up against. But beginning in verse number 24, it says, so God abandoned them to do whatever shameful things their heart desired. In other words, they'd already abandoned God, and this is the result. As a result, they did vile and degrading things with each other's bodies. They traded the truth about God for a lie. They kicked God out from his word, and they were left on their own devices. So they worshiped and served the things God created instead of the Creator himself, who is worthy of eternal praise. That is why God abandoned them. Notice what happens when we abandon God, God will eventually abandon us. It says that is why God abandoned them to their shameful desires. Even the women turned against the natural way to have sex and instead indulged in sex with each other. And the men, instead of having normal sexual relations with women, burned with lust for each other. Men did shameful things with other men, and as a result of this sin, they suffered within themselves the penalty they deserved. Since they thought it was foolish to acknowledge God, and that's what our country's done. We don't think God needs to be part of our lives. He abandoned them. The second time, he abandons them to their foolish thinking and let them do things that should never be done. Now, most people think that's the bottom rung, but these next few verses, just as I read and you're looking, see if this doesn't describe America. Beginning in verse number 29. So their lives became full of every kind of wickedness. Again, each one of these, I can have a commentary, and so I want to refrain myself and just give you the whole list. Sin, greed, hate. When I looked at that word hate, I just look at the riots. I mean, now it's just anger coming out everywhere. Envy. We envy what other people have, and we have a right to what other people have. So there's murder, there's quarreling. Just watch the news. You can't even see a newscast without arguing back and forth. Malicious behavior and gossip. They are backstabbers, haters of God, insolent, proud, and boastful. They invent new ways of sinning, and they disobey their parents. They refuse to understand. They break their promises, are heartless, and have no mercy. They know God's justice requires that those who do these things deserve to die, and yet they do them anyway. Worse yet, they encourage others to do so. in their lives. Now, again, that I don't know what else can describe our country more than that right now. I mean, that's just the moral fabric of where we are as a country. And God says there's a predictable end to all of that. He will not allow that to keep going. Now, all you have to do, I've mentioned this book before, but you don't have to read it, but it's called The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. And you're going to see how that nation went through this. You go back in the days of Noah, this is what was happening. And the end result, God had to bring a flood. And so in the judgment in the Roman Empire, he wiped out that nation, and it crumbled from within. And we're almost at that point. I don't know if we're there yet or not, but it's only going to be the grace of God that will restore our country. It won't be passing laws. It won't be electing a new president. It really doesn't matter who the president is if the moral climate of our nation is spiraling downward. And so it sounds so much like us today. And if we don't repent, we have only one thing to expect, and that is to expect God's wrath. Now, again, I'm not saying this has to be the second coming. It wasn't in Noah's day. It wasn't in the Roman Empire. And this cycle has repeated throughout history. I wish I had more time. I love history and can show you how nations have gone through this spiral, and to see where we are today and see all these other countries where God, in fact, brought his judgment. Now, again, this is our way our culture is. Now, our culture is not going to be fixed, even though we can fix the virus. The virus is going to have nothing to do with the moral climate of our country. This is a result of rejecting God. Now, what I want to do is to let you know what's going on in one generation. This has all happened within my lifetime. That's why it's so personal to me and probably to you. That the church is no longer just a minority, and it is no question about it in our country today. It's actually in disfavor, where at one time, people thought church was okay. Now, whether you realize or not, now the older we get, we're not accustomed to this, and we may have some pushback, but it's true that we've gone from favor to being tolerated, to being marginalized, to being in disfavor, and the next step is going to be persecution. If we don't change, if the church is not allowed to change society, it's going to turn on the church, and you can start seeing the signs of that already happening. Now, again, we need to understand this culture that we live in, because what I'm going to say now is kind of the premise. The tools that the church is using today that we used 20 and 30 years ago, in a moment I'll define all of this and show you what it is ineffective, because we were basing on a different culture 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's totally changed now. Now, what I want to do is just kind of show you where our culture is in this list in Romans 1, where we are as far as morally concerned. Now, we have gone in my lifetime. Now, these are statistics from the 1980s until now, 40 years, that where at one time, 70% of Americans had a favorable view of the church. Back in the 80s, it still was high, but now it has been going down, down, down to where now it's the opposite. Only 30%, and we'll see in 1916 or 2016, they did a survey. And at that point, only 30% of America had a favorable view of the church. Now it's less than 20. What they're saying is that there's 80% now in 2021 who are saying, not only do not like the church, I will never go to a church. Now, we have flipped that whole thing in less than 40 years because of when we kick God out of our society. Now, I'm not saying that it has to be always when we kicked him out of the schools where we couldn't pray in schools, although I think there's some ramifications of that. But we as a culture said, God, we don't want God part of us. We champion the separation of church and state. What we're saying is, God, we don't want you involved in our lives. And God would only tolerate that so long. And that's kind of where we are now. But now we've got to where the millennial generation, according to them, only 15% think favorably of the church. And that's bad enough as it is, which now you add Gen Z, which is the latest generation, only 5% have a favorable view of a church. It means 95% of our young people, 20 and below, have no concern about the church and don't have anything to do with the church. Now, I thought those were extreme figures until I came to Traverse City when Sarah and I was working in Wildlife, which is the middle school for West and East Middle School. And when we asked those kids, how many of your friends would even consider coming to a church, they couldn't name one. And these were Christians. And so that figure is pretty true. We have got a culture that is anti-God. And it's not just tolerated. Now they're marginalized. Now they want to start attacking that and start taking away, chip away at what's going on. Now, again, I don't want to give a lot of statistics this morning. I'm a stat guy, and you get lost in all these statistics. All I'm trying to say is this pool of believers is shrinking, and this whole pool of those who have already said with their words they will not go to church is getting larger and larger. And yet we as a church will still trying to use our tried and true method of 30 years ago of inviting people to church when they've already said they're not going to come. And we could keep doing that. And that's what we've done until COVID. And we'll see in a moment, I think God is wanting to do there is we need to change that strategy. Now, again, I'm not saying it's right. I'm just trying to describe our culture. Now, let me give you a few things about that people are interested in Christ, in Jesus. They're just not interested in the church. And in a moment, I want to explain why that may be so. But what they've shown is this, that even though so many will not go to church, 75% of non-believers said they will talk about their faith to someone. Now, here's the clincher to this. This brings me great sadness. 75% of lost people today said they will talk about their faith to a friend if they think that their friend's faith is significant in their lives. What that means is they say they know a lot of believers and they don't feel like Christ is very significant in their lives by what they say and what they do. And we need to change that. So if we're going to be effective in reaching our culture, we've got to show them that Christ is significant in our lives by what we say and what we do. It goes together. Now, again, I'm going to try to see if I can get you to understand their mindset. I'm not saying it's right, but it shows you what we have to counter. It would be like if your neighbor came up to you and they're Muslim, and they say, I want you to invite you to my mosque this Sunday morning. It's a great mosque. We have a lot of people there. The imam does a great sermon. We have a lot of stuff for kids. We have a lot of fun. You ought to come to my mosque. Now, most Americans would say, no, they're fearful. They don't know what they're getting themselves into. They think you guys are weird. You're strange. I don't want to go. Now, keep in mind, this is the same attitude of a lost person, especially Gen X and the millennials. When you invite them to church, they think the same thing. I'm not going to your church. You guys are weird. You're strange. You may ask me to do some crazy things. I don't want to go to that kind of a church. That's what we're up against. And we've got to show them a difference in their lives so for them to create some hunger. But that's the kind of what they do. They feel the same way. A lost person feels the same way as you would feel if someone invited you to a mosque. Let me ask you, give you another scenario that kind of gives you the understanding of their mindset. Now, I'm not going to ask for discussion here because we could spend the rest of our time giving examples of this. But in the last month, how many times have you seen on the news, governors and mayors, they make these restrictions, then they go out and violate them themselves. They say you can't go to restaurants, and they go to restaurants, and they go to the expensive ones. They say you can't do this, but they do it themselves, or they make the laws, but they don't want you, but they feel like they don't have to follow those laws. Now, I do want response here. What word do we call that? When someone says one thing that other people should do, but yet they don't have to do it themselves and they do something differently, what do we call that?
Hypocrisy.
Exactly. Now, keep in mind, that's exactly how non-Christians feel when they look at Christians who judge them for doing things that they say is wrong, but they see the Christians doing the same thing. Now, again, I'm not saying it's right. I just want you to understand why they're so resistant of coming to church, because they see such hypocrisy in believers. That's why we have to be consistent in our lifestyle, in our words, to show you we're not like everybody else necessarily. But it's the same thing that they feel of hypocrisy in the church. Again, I'm not saying it's right. It's just how they sense things. Now, that sounds very discouraging, and it probably is without Christ. Now, keep in mind, when you read the Bible, go to the end of the Bible, and guess what? We win. Jesus wins at the end, and the cross is the answer. Jesus says, you make disciples, and I will build my church. So we need to quit trying to build Christ's church. We just need to be disciple makers who make people who are like Christ in what they say and they do, and God will build his church. Now, again, that's why I say we need a different model. If we're going to be effective, in sharing the gospel with a culture that is so anti-church. They're not necessarily anti-Christ, but they lump Christians in his hypocrisy mode, and they don't want to listen to them. And that's why we have to change. We got to quit being building centric, which means make them come to church before they hear the gospel. They're not going to come. So why do we spend all of our time and money trying to attract people to a church where they're not going to come unless they got a huge need? But we need to have a different type of model. We need to start with Jesus, not the church. And if we learn to start with Jesus and the people we're involved with, we may see a more favorable opinion of what Christ can do in their lives. Now, again, I'm not against meeting in churches. We'll still meet. We still want to meet, but we need to start with Jesus first. So here's been our strategy for the last 30 years. It was effective when 70% of the country had a favorable view of the church, but it was a strategy based on come to church. And that's what we've done. It's been building centric. Come to church. That's been our bread and butter. Some people have called this invest and invite. You invest in lost people, then invite them to church, and there they can hear about Jesus. Well, that strategy won't work because they're not going to come to church first. That's not the first step. We've got to back that up. We use what is called an attractional methodology, where we can attract the lost to our church. And we say, come to our church. We have better preaching, better teaching, better music, better children, better youth ministries, better counseling. We have more fun. And we go on trying to get people to say, come to our church. We're better than the church down the street. That will not work. It's not effective because they're not going to come to church anyway. Again, I'm not saying this is right. I just want us to understand this mindset that our culture has, which is against God. Now, do you realize, based on that, can you now realize how intimidating it is for lost people to come to a church, much less a house church? Because they're already skeptical. They're fearful. They don't know what's going to happen if they come to this thing called a church. Because they don't trust the Christians that are inviting them. We've got to learn to build the trust first before we can expect them to come. They know if they come to a small church like ours, they're not going to be able to just come in and get out unnoticed. They're going to be seen and they're going to be noticed. Now, for believers, we want that. But for a lost person who has a very bad view of the church, they're kind of skeptical of coming to that. They want to be a fly on the wall. That's why they like large churches. Again, I'm not against large churches. They can be very effective, but it's easier to go to a large church and never be seen, never talk to anybody, and then come back and never have to engage people. But that's why it's when we invite people to our church, don't be surprised if that's our first line of invitation. Don't be surprised if they say no. They don't want to be involved in that. But if we don't digress from what we do, because we've been the last 2 weeks, what does the church need to do? We need to go back to the basics, because church basically is for believers. Now, lost people can come to know Christ in a church, but the service itself is primarily for believers. But what the church has done, we've diluted the service down so low to make it attractional that we've lost the power, to where they come and they say, there's no difference in going to that church and going to another group of people that I know in the city. And so we need to maintain what we do as a church. But we've got to back it up and say, church can't be our first shot. It's got to back up to where they can build trust. And so if they learn to trust us, they may be open to learning to trust Christ before they even come. But our whole strategy of being attractional and trying to get people to come because we're better than someone else. And so we need to not do that. That's why a live stream, one of the things of COVID is doing is allowing churches to have their service in such a way that it can be broadcast, that people can check it out online before they ever come physically to a church. Now, here's what most churches have done during this COVID season. It's better than nothing, but it still falls woefully short. We've taken what we do in Sunday morning and just put it on video and put that out there. Now, if you're a lost person and you're just thumbing through your feeds and you see a church service, it's got to be different to catch their eye. They already don't want to go to a normal church service. So they see on video, on live stream, a typical church service, they're going to check it out. Now, again, I don't like this, what I'm about to say, but it's what the reality of what they say is this. When we try to put music on a service and try to use that as a tool for evangelism, most lost people say, I'm checking it out. I don't know the songs they're singing. I don't want to sing to myself usually in their living room or wherever they're watching it on their phone. They're not going to sing out loud. They're not interested in announcements about what a church normally does. So what this thing's got to do, and that's what I've been praying, God, give me some creativity on how to provide a service that doesn't have all these things that they're going to check out on, but is appeal to lost people. It's like the hook. And so if you've got someone you say you'd like to invite them, say, check us out online. And when they go, don't be surprised that after the first year, if you check these out, it's not going to be for believers. I'm going to use the same text, but I'm going to make it evangelistic to show them how it's to be. I want to design it for a lost person to be engaging to where they would watch it for 15 minutes. And that's a step before they come to the physical facility of where we meet as a church. And so we need to have a strategy that backs up before we ask them to come to church. All the way back here means we've got to be involved in their lives. So there's got to be some other steps that are involved. And so we see that. Now, again, that type of service needs to be very different. It's geared for lost people. Now, again, we can use that. It can be used instead of being for believers. It can be used for lost people to say, I might want to check out that church. Now, again, most people, and this is where it's not about me, it's in general, most lost people, if they want to go to church, they want to hear the pastor. Now, again, I'm not saying we can't do all these other things, but they want to hear that. And if they see it, a pastor speaking their language and not too churchy and not geared for lost people, they may be open to you. And that's what we would hope to have happen there. So again, I'm not saying we do away with churches. I'm not saying we do away with their Sunday morning experience. Now, keep in mind, there have been 31 worldwide pandemics since Christ was here on planet Earth. And after every one of those, the Sunday morning live experience has flourished. It's kept on going. COVID isn't going to knock out Sunday morning worship. And we may dwindle in numbers, but it's not going to knock out the church. Jesus says, I will build my church, and the gates of hell, and not even COVID, will not prevail against it. Now, again, why is COVID happening? My opinion. I think God is saying, church, you need to wake up. Go back to the basics of what we've talked about these last few weeks and realize that our approach, if we're going to make an impact in our culture, we've got to change how we do things. We have the same gospel. We have the same church service. I'm not saying we dilute those in any way, shape, or fashion. But understand it's going to be hard for people to come unless they have trust in us as individuals before they come to a service. Now, again, we need to not dilute what we do in Sunday morning to attract people. Because if people come, they want to see Christ in action, where they see relationships building and see answer to prayer and see what's going on. So we don't dilute that, but we allow people to see us in another venue, which is totally different. Not totally, it's the same passage, but it's done differently to attract lost people. Now, having said all of that, let me take now, I wanted to take a few moments to rush through that to kind of give the big picture. Now, I'm sure probably questions or ideas or so forth maybe come up in your mind. And I want to take a few moments to kind of discuss some of those out so that we understand what I was trying to say. Let me tell you what I'm not saying. I'm not saying we do away with Sunday morning. I'm saying we go back to the New Testament model. I'm not saying we do away with a lot of what we do inside of church. It's what we do outside of church that we need to change. It's like going to them, not expecting them coming to us, because they're not going to come to us unless there's a tremendous need. So what do we do when we're out there? We need to be Christ to the people we're involved with. Hopefully that will give them a taste or desire to know what it is in our lives that makes us different. There's got to be something different in what we say and what we do. Forget them to stop the spiral that they're in going down to say, maybe there is an answer and it's with this person called Jesus. It's like we started out with the video in Kenya. Those boys, they need to have an alternative because they're destined to be either involved in drugs or gangs or they'll die on the streets. And so we need to take the gospel to others. Now, having said that, let me just ask for some any comments or anything from you guys for response on how does that hit you, what I've just shared so far? Anybody have any comments, suggestions, or questions?
Well, I think you're right on. I think it's absolutely necessary to go back to the first model and to go out, to put ourselves out there and to be willing to talk and to be willing to take the criticism or hear their statements of their disappointment and so on, and then address them by showing them love and acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to get out of our recliners and get on our feet and go.
Yeah.
There
I
are
think
people
it
out
would
there
be-
that are absolutely starving for attention and for personal contact. Strangers, you go to the grocery store and everybody, if you just give them a half smile, they're willing to sometimes pour out their whole life. You get a lot more back than you want to sometimes. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, that's where I think it is.
Yeah.
I think you'd be amazed too that the people, how open they are. I was standing in line at the lab to get my blood drawn on Friday morning. And I don't know how the conversation started, but my response was, after we were talking about mask and the COVID, was I said, God is still in charge or in control. And it was an older lady, and she didn't say anything, and we talked a few more minutes, and then I said, God is still in control. And then they called her in, and then there was a lady behind me, and she was jabbering and talking about just different things. And I said, but God is still in charge. And she said, amen to that. But people I think, are hungry for conversation lately, and that they can't see our smiles. They can't see, what's behind our mask. They can read, you just, even if you can say hi, because most people are looking down nowadays. If you notice them in the stores, they're looking down. They won't look at you. And I don't understand that, but I think conversation is becoming non-existent, or it's just not. I mean, when you're in Meyer, people say hi to you. Not today, because they're scared to even come behind from their mask.
Surveys now, the number one need of people who are outside of churches, I'm going to use the biblical term, they want community. They want relationships. And even though we have all this information of technology, we're getting further away from intimate communication. Just basic friendships that we kind of take for granted. But even those who say, I don't want to go to church, they want good friends. And it's kind of like you, Cookie, by just saying, I'll give you a study Bible. When they see that Christ means something to us, we think that we're going to drive them away. It actually will attract them. Not everybody. There's some are so hardened. They've said no to God for so long, and they denied God. That their heart is so hardened, they will not change. There's going to be some that are always going to do that. But there's an awful lot of people, if they see that Christ means something to us in a significant way, they may be more open if we don't put them in a box and make them stand out and look weird and things like that, or require them to come to our church before we can have conversations with them. Anything else? Okay, again, I don't want this to be a downer of a sermon, but we need to understand how people who are outside of Christ think of us, and realize maybe we need to, again, we saw that in the early church. One day of the week, they did all of those things. And then 6 days a week, they were out sharing their faith. And we've got to get out of our mind that we're going to run people away by us just being Christians, by doing and saying the right things and giving him the credit or referring to him. Not everybody will do that, but we've got to learn to take what we have and go outside. Now, before we close, I mentioned this before, but I do want some comment because we're getting, I think it's something that I would like to see us do. You may have heard me say that there's several groups, and I found one that I think that would be the best for us, that will give us names of people who have moved into our city from over 50 miles away. And if we could just say, and they will give us, this person moved into this house, and here are their names. They won't give us a phone number, which I understand. They won't give us an email, which I understand. But what I'd like to see us do is put together a welcome package and drop it off at their house soon after they've moved in, and say, welcome to their neighborhood. We're from such and such. Here's just some things we'd like to give to you and welcome you. Now, the reason I like about this company, they give us their address, so I can follow that up with the letter. I won't have a phone number. I'll have a name, but I won't have a phone number or an email or anything like that. But I can follow that up with another letter to talk about, introducing myself, our church, and say, is there any questions? But what that is, that's just one strategy that's basically dealing with believers here. This is basically believers. They're coming in, if they've have a background in the past of church, if they're looking, I'm not saying they would automatically come to our church, but it gives us a foot in the door to say, would you consider, as things settle down, and if you're looking for a church, let me tell you about ours. Now, again, it's kind of a both and, but this is not for unbelievers. This is more for believers. But for someone who's looking, now I mentioned before, we had a young lady who did that. They found us and she just moved in, very open. And this is when it was spiking up about a month ago. And she said, being in a home just doesn't, I'm a little leery of that. I can't afford to have to self-quarantine. So she found a good church. It's a much larger church, but there she said, I go and I can stay my distance from people. I don't get to know a lot of people, but at least I'm there. And I dare say she'll probably stay at that church now that when COVID begins to go down and we begin to meet back in homes. But it is a way. Now, the question I want to ask you guys is, what would you think would be helpful? And all I want to do is want to be helpful to someone moving into a new home. What would be helpful for someone who's moving from, I won't say out of state, but they're not in the city. I'm not talking about those who just moved down the street or whatever. Someone from out of this area who comes to move in, what type of things would be good that we could give them to say, thank you for, hope you're enjoying your stay. And here's some things that we just want to give as a gift, as a welcome gift for you. What would be some items that you think would be good to put in a welcome gift? That's kind of what I'm asking for. So what would you think would be helpful?
Well, I think I've moved back into Michigan a couple of times from Ohio. You've moved into Michigan. Very few natives are here. We've all come from someplace. And what were the things that were the hardest for us to make contact with people? We need to put a community list together for organizations and for us and churches that are available and open, some kinds of fellowships. That's what we're all looking for. And it is hard to get established or walk into a place without knowing anybody. It doesn't have to be a church. If they're older, the senior citizen or PACE that Ricky was talking about, put it out there and tell them that that's there. And then be willing to go with them the first time if they want, if they don't feel comfortable. It's hard to make friends and contacts moving into an area. And it's not just the church that they need. They need other, what gym is good, just make some kind of a connection there. What are their interests? Where can they go? They want some classes? I'm going on like I said. There's so many different things that nobody knows about. So if we get together and kind of come up, do a brainstorm that and write it down and have something we can hand them, here it is. Here's the telephone number.
I do know the city, and I've seen, I just had to go back and find it. They do put out a list of a lot of service agencies where the hospitals are. They don't list all the doctors, but they do some of the major things, major food stores like Myers and Olson's, those Tom's or whatever around. Just some, again, these are just practical, helpful things. Probably has nothing, those type of things may not have anything to do about Christ. What that doing is building the trust factor that they see in us, something that's trying to be helpful. Again, they're going to come, or doesn't make sure that doesn't mean that they will open up to us, but they could. but they now know who we are. If we can give them things that they need, not what we think that they need. And again, what they need may be something
Absolutely.
different than what Christians need.
I kind of
Also-
agree. I think there's a lot of documents already out there that
Yes.
we probably wouldn't even have to brainstorm. That's because I was thinking
Mhm.
childcare is a huge issue in our area, very hard to
Mhm.
find for families. But I'm sure there's already a list out there that we could access that, you know, lists all the area childcare.
Mhm.
Also entertainment, wholesome entertainment, the concerts, once things open up again. What does Interlochen Music Camp have available? Do they like to go to plays? The Playhouse, churches have a lot of concerts and stuff once they're open.
Mhm.
What they don't have to go to a bar to be entertained or to meet somebody. There's other things out there, but they're a little bit harder to find.
Mhm. A friend of mine who went to Ohio, he put together a list of things that families could do with their kids. Where are the
Mhm.
playgrounds? What does the city offer for, like
That's a good
before,
one.
we used to have the downtown State Theater on Saturday mornings. That would be very helpful for a young couple with kids.
Mhm.
Those kind of things. I know I could go to the visitor center. One thing that I would put into this little, be like a small package, is they got these, I call them goofy maps of Traverse City, where they're just handwritten, it shows you the basic things downtown, the river and all those things. Is a
Mhm.
fold out, and it has some things out there that are helpful, but just kind of a visual of some of the major landmarks of the city about where things are.
Sure.
That could easily, they'll give those to us free. We don't have to pay for those. And again, it's just, they have some things that might be helpful. I know the Chamber of Commerce, I know there's a website that deals with Traverse City tourism, but they have something in print as well that has that information on it that can be part of that. And then they can look it up and say, oh, I didn't know they had this, or I didn't know the city had that. But it's just, those are the kind of things that they view as helpful, of things that they're interested in, not us. They're probably not right off the bat. Now we can, by saying we're a church, if they're interested in automatically coming, we'll have that information in there. But these are some other steps that we could take that would just start the process of getting to know them if they respond. They may not respond.
Mhm.
What else do you think could be helpful?
There's also what are the natural things up here? What are God's natural beauties that are available to us, the people that have been here long enough to have investigated? There's the nature centers, there, sand dunes, canoeing, that's all family stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Trails, the trails are wonderful up here. But you look at a brochure when and if you can get into a restaurant, the brochures are there. But that's not the same as somebody local saying, oh, this is the best one. You'd like this one.
Mm-hmm.
And there's tons of stuff. There's what's it called? You can go up and look at the stars and stuff. That has, some people are interested in that. But that's all God's stuff,
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of God's country as far as I'm concerned. It's beautiful up here. So
Yeah.
I'll shut up now, maybe.
That's okay. Yeah. I know, again, this friend of mine who's in Ohio, with their church, they put together, for couples, top 10 places in their city that give either free kids meals with their parents or a big discount. And parents are always looking for that. If I go there, my kids eat free. Yeah, I'm going there. It's just a list of restaurants. It's all it is. And they put them out. They put that themselves. They just brainstorm among themselves and found those. And he said that's been a big one for those who have families with children. They like that one, he said, because that's something they were looking for.
I think one of the probably just as important to a lot of people as their kids is their animals. And, where's a good dog park, or what are beach friendly for dogs, and so that it might be a good connection
That's good.
for a lot of people.
You're right.
I'll put a plug in for me. I take care of pets at home, so give my name out.
People are interested in that. Yeah, it's almost as important as a child. I won't say as important, but almost. Can you think of anything else? I know when they have like the movie nights during the summer, the film festival. Those are free things we could pick up. And again, those are just some very practical. Now, there will be in this, there will be a simple thing about our church, and then I will follow that up with the letter, introducing myself. Say, if you're interested, you can go look at one of our services, the kind of thing I was talking about to let them see a very shortened version of what we did here this morning. I won't do the whole thing, obviously, but then that will give them a chance to respond. If they do, then if someone responds, then we would follow that up with a lot more. But it's just basically bringing it to their doorsteps and not even trying to, engage in it. If you can, great, but don't worry about it if you just put it on the doorstep and just knock the door and then leave. They know they have it. And if obviously you get a chance to talk with them, that's great, but I don't want them to feel like we're wanting to get inside their house or anything like that. It's just welcome. And here's who we are, and I'd like to welcome you to Traverse City.
That's a good idea.
Can you think of anything? I mean, I'm just trying to put some of these things together because we're looking at probably after the first of the year, and let me try it for several months. Hopefully by then we're able to meet in homes again. And then we could tell people, if you're really, if this is something you'd like, here's where we meet. Love to have you, those kind of things.
If we wanted to give people a little gift, I mean, moving is so expensive. So a lot of times people don't have a lot of extra. I mean, we could do like a gift card to a local restaurant, maybe not one of like the chains like Red Lobster, but something local for them to try that they don't typically have extra cash when they first move in.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if I was a newcomer, I'd love that. Yes. I know some churches give Starbucks cards if they like Starbucks. Here's a $5 Starbucks card or whatever. Yeah. But that would be that definitely would be helpful.
They have the downtown gift cards. It's a generic gift card that you can use for any store downtown.
That's cool.
Okay. Okay. Again, we'll close out now, but before we close, anything else that may come to mind? I don't want to keep us long. But I'll put this down in a sheet and I'll send out to everybody to, give you time to think about things like that. Now, I know Cookie, with Dwayne in the music industry, you may know, and I would not know where to go, but you may know of some place that has various things like the arts. That there's some people would love to go to something. I may talk to you about that later about where we could go find something like that.
They have a lot of things. They're streaming everything, though. The arts, yes. The museums, all the special things they usually do, they're streaming.
Okay. Well, okay. Well, I appreciate. I'm sorry. What?
Before we go, Maydeen just sent me a text. She says, "Sorry we missed again. I'm not feeling well again. Low back pain, sore throat. Please pray that we'll get better and overcome this."
Okay. Okay.
Is Janice there? Janice and Roger, are they on? Okay, they just got back from downstate, and I guess a large portion of the family down there have been tested for the virus, and they're kind of self-quarantining right now. They got back last night about 4:30, 5 o'clock. I was watching the dog.